Hello and welcome to another Mr. Carter Science Special. In this video we'll be covering how your body controls blood glucose levels and also the two different types of diabetes. Primarily this video is aimed at the Edexcel IGCSE specifications, but it will work for other specifications such as AQA. As always, keep your eye open on the syllabus links so that you know where you are in your curriculum. The control of blood glucose is an example of homeostasis. Homeostasis means keeping a constant internal environment in the body. And that means that the body needs to keep certain things exactly the same or as close to the same as possible. For example, your body will control and try and maintain the same temperature, the same amount of water and the same amount of salt in the blood. And the body will also try and maintain and control the same amount of blood glucose or blood sugar levels. Homeostasis mechanisms are generally controlled by negative feedback. And what this means is that as one particular factor, for example, the blood sugar levels or blood glucose levels rises too high, there will be a controlling mechanism which will bring that blood glucose level back down to normal. And if the blood glucose levels falls too low, there'll be another controlling mechanism which will send the blood glucose levels back to normal. So you have a constant flux going up and down throughout your body. And that's how most of these conditions within your body, temperature, water, salt, blood glucose, are maintained by this negative feedback. So before we start thinking about blood glucose levels, let's just think, why does your body need glucose? Well, all your cells need glucose and oxygen for respiration, that chemical reaction that releases energy. The glucose is transported around your body in the blood, and the amount of glucose in your blood is regulated by hormones produced by the pancreas. Now the pancreas is found just below the stomach here, and there you got the start of the small intestine, and this organ just off to one side here is the pancreas. The pancreas produces enzymes which are used in digestion, but it will also produce hormones which will control your blood sugar levels. So let's have a think about that in a bit more detail. Here is a problem. When you eat a meal, a large amount of glucose will diffuse into your blood. This is too much, and it will pass out in your urine an hour or two after your meal. There won't be enough glucose in your blood, and your cells won't be able to respire efficiently. So what's the solution to this problem? Well, the solution is two hormones produced by the pancreas, insulin and glucagon. So let's think about this in a little bit more detail. We can represent the normal blood glucose levels in your body with this red line here, that constant level of blood glucose. And we can consider what will then happen if you eat a meal. If you eat a meal, then your blood glucose levels will begin to rise. And when that happens, the pancreas will recognize this rise of blood glucose and release the hormone insulin. Now insulin will travel in the blood, and it will travel to the liver, and the liver will then recognize the insulin and react to the insulin by absorbing the blood glucose and converting that glucose into a compound called glycogen. So the glucose will be stored as this insoluble compound, glycogen. And glycogen is a complex carbohydrate. In fact, let's write that in blue. We can remember that glycogen is the storage of glucose, because glucose contains a lot of energy. That's why your cells need it, so they can release that energy in respiration. So therefore glycogen will also contain a lot of energy. So if we think about that final E, we can write the word energy to remind ourselves that glycogen is a carbohydrate and it's a good store of energy. So insulin travels in the blood to the liver, and it tells the liver to absorb the glucose and store it as glycogen. And therefore the blood glucose levels will begin to fall. Now if those blood glucose levels get too low, then the pancreas again will recognize this, and the pancreas will release a new hormone called glucagon. Now again, we can remember that glucagon is a hormone by thinking about that final O, and we can write the word hormone through using that O to remind ourselves. Glucagon is a hormone. So glucagon will again be released by the pancreas, and it will travel in the blood to the liver. And the liver cells will react to this hormone glucagon by breaking down the glycogen. And therefore releasing the glucose back into the blood. So the blood glucose levels will therefore rise again. If they get too high, the pancreas will release the insulin, which will cause the liver to absorb the glucose and store the glucose as glycogen, and so the cycle continues, constantly going up and down, as an example of homeostasis controlled by negative feedback. So we can think about this using this diagram here. We can say that the liver will always be converting. If we have too much glucose, then insulin is released by the pancreas, and that glucose will be converted by the liver into glycogen. Now glucose is soluble, so it's a very poor molecule for storage. It can move easily from cell to cell to cell, but glycogen is insoluble, so it's a very good molecule for storage because it can't easily move between cells. If we have too little blood glucose, then the pancreas will recognize this and produce the hormone glycogen, and we will get the opposite reaction, the opposite conversion. The liver will convert glycogen back into glucose in response to the hormone glucagon. So just pause the video for a moment, copy down this gap fill to show yourself all that you've learnt so far. I'll give you the answers in a moment. So homeostasis is the maintenance of a body's internal environment, and blood sugar regulation, well, the body will maintain a constant level of glucose in the blood. If the level of blood glucose rises too high, then the pancreas will secrete the hormone insulin, and insulin tells the liver cells to absorb glucose and store it as glycogen. If the blood glucose levels fall too low, the pancreas will release the hormone glucagon, and this tells the liver to break down the glycogen and release glucose. Pause the video again now, copy down this table. We've got 6 keywords here, 3 of them are very similar. Can you make certain that you know which words are the hormone, which words are the carbohydrate, and which words refer to the organs of this process that control the process? And here are the answers. Glucose is a carbohydrate. The liver is an organ that will store the glucose, and it will store the glucose as the carbohydrate glycogen. The pancreas is the organ that makes the hormones, and it makes the hormones glucagon and insulin. So you've seen what happens in the body under normal circumstances, but of course there are a couple of diseases which are associated with changes in blood sugars or blood glucose levels. Those diseases are known as diabetes type 1 and type 2. So we're going to look at those 2 diseases in a little bit more detail so we can compare and contrast those 2 diseases. So if you have diabetes, then you are a person who cannot control your blood glucose levels. You'll produce lots of urine and you'll feel thirsty all the time. The glucose can't get into the cells of your body, so you will feel tired and you will lose weight. Often this will be a result of two different factors. If you've got type 1 diabetes, and this is the diabetes that you are born with, and you're born with it because the pancreas cannot make insulin. No insulin at all. And therefore there's no insulin to travel in the blood to the liver and tell the liver to store glucose. So the glucose levels in your blood will rise incredibly quickly, and then they'll stay quite high for a while until your kidney eventually excretes the excess glucose, and the glucose will come out in your urine. The second type of diabetes is known as type 2. And in this case, the pancreas is producing insulin. However, the cells of your body, and in particular the liver cells, are now resistant to the insulin. So you've had so much sugar in your lifetime, but those cells have become so used to storing so much sugar that they're no longer responding to the messages of insulin saying store more glucose, store more glucose. So eventually those cells will no longer respond, and they'll be resistant and will have the same problem. But if you eat a large amount of sugar, your blood sugar levels will increase and increase and increase and keep increasing, and then they'll stay high for a long time and slowly decrease as your kidney removes the excess glucose in your urine. And it's not hard to think of why somebody might suffer from type 2 diabetes when you think of the diagrams we've got on this page. Just look at the sheer amount of sugar that will be in what would be considered a fairly normal sized bottle of Coca-Cola, or even just a can of Coca-Cola. If you drink one can, you are ingesting and taking in this amount of sugar, and it's a huge amount. It can be up to 50 grams easily in one can, depending on what particular drink you're drinking. So it's very easy in our modern lifestyle to take in far too much glucose and far too much sugars, and therefore encourage people to be overweight or obese, or we have a lack of exercise, which all contribute to an increasing risk of type 2 diabetes when those cells become resistant to insulin. So have a little think for a moment of everything I've just gone through about diabetes type 1 and type 2. Pause the video, write down these two gap fill exercises. What have you just learned from that small discussion? So here's the answer. People who cannot control their blood glucose levels have diabetes. They produce a lot of urine, they will feel thirsty all the time, and the glucose can't get into the cells of your body, so you will feel tired because there's no respiration going on, or very little, and you will lose a lot of weight. Type 1 diabetes, the pancreas does not produce insulin. So the treatment of type 1 diabetes is you need to have insulin injections at regular intervals during the day to encourage your liver to store the excess glucose from your blood as glycogen. Type 2 diabetes, in this case the pancreas does produce insulin. However, liver cells are resistant to the insulin. So type 2 diabetes can be caused by high fat diets, high sugar diets, a lack of exercise. Getting older is also a risk factor, as it is obesity. So the liver cells are resistant to that insulin. Your body cells, your muscle cells are also resistant as well. So let's try a few exam style questions then with this topic. Explain why people with type 1 diabetes must control their blood glucose concentrations with injections of insulin. And this is a 2-mark question, so we're looking for 2 separate points. Well, here's the answer. People with type 1 diabetes do not produce insulin from their pancreas. Both areas would be needed for that point. so they must inject the right amount of insulin at the right times to keep their blood glucose concentration within safe limits. What about this exam question? Describe 2 ways a person with type 2 diabetes can control their blood glucose levels without the use of hormones. So think carefully, we're looking at type 2 diabetes and we cannot use hormones. So we cannot mention insulin at all because insulin is a hormone. So here's the answer. Type 2 diabetes cannot be controlled using insulin. So instead it has to be controlled by either diet, exercise, or sometimes medication, in this case glucophage, which will encourage cells to reduce the blood sugar levels and store glucose. So 2 marks here. 1 by naming the hormone that we cannot use, and 2 marks for considering the other strategies that we could use. Change your diet, reduce the amount of sugar in your diet, increase the amount of exercise so that you are using up the sugar that's in your blood in respiration. I hope you've enjoyed watching this video. Please don't forget to like and subscribe so you will be getting notifications of the next videos that I make. I hope this has been useful for your revision and your learning. Please write a comment in the comments below. Let me know what you've learned. Let me know if you've enjoyed these videos. Thank you very much for your time.